Welcome to Adventures in Accessibility, a podcast that explores the far reaches of disability, access, and inclusion, with your host, Emily Schumann.
Welcome back, everyone, and thanks for joining us. Today's guest is Christy Gardner. Christy is a 39-year-old retired Army veteran from Oxford, Maine. She was injured overseas in 2006 and spent nearly 5 years rehabbing before she was finally able to live on her own again. She started participating in adaptive sports thanks to her service dog, Moxie. She's now an assistant captain of the U.S. women's para ice hockey team and was an alternate for Tokyo 2020 in shot put and discus. She also represented the USA at the Para Surfing World Championships in 2020. Christy has been training service dogs and therapy dogs for the past 9 years, but wanted to grow that dream to help more Mainers in need. Mission Working Dogs was founded in July 2020 as a local nonprofit to do just that. The organization serves to train service dogs and therapy dogs for the local community and has started construction on a new training center in Maine. Well, hi, Christy. Thanks so much for being our guest today. We're so pleased to have you.
No problem. I'm happy to be here.
So some of our listeners might not be familiar with you and kind of your story and the work that you do. So I'd love if you could just kind of tell us about yourself in your own words.
Sure. I was an athlete my entire life. Growing up as a kid, I did multiple sports every season. And in high school, I had permission of the athletic director to play 2 sports per season. And then I went to college on athletic scholarships. I graduated in 2005 and joined the Army and got hurt in July of 2006. After that, I spent 1.5 years on active duty rehabbing and 3.5 years at the VA with physical therapy, speech therapy, and occupational therapy. And a few years after that, I was declared independent so that I could live on my own again and not need the assistance of others. And then I really got into the world of adaptive sports. So I absolutely love sled hockey and snowboarding and track and field and things like that. And went back to college and got a degree in therapeutic recreation.
That's awesome. So you mentioned your injury. Can you talk a little bit more about what specifically was injured or what your disabilities are?
Sure. I had a head trauma with multiple skull fractures and facial fractures. So I have a traumatic brain injury and seizures. I also had abdominal damage and a spinal cord injury. So I had surgery on my stomach, intestines, and uterus. And then, of course, the spinal cord injury, which luckily is incomplete. So I'm an incomplete para. And as a result of that, I actually lost both legs below the knee. And then I had a crush injury to my left arm. So I lost some use of that arm and 2 fingers.
Wow. Can you tell me a little bit about how that was to, kind of take on that new identity or, what was it like to wake up or, kind of realize that you're now have different abilities than you did before? What was that like for you?
So a lot of it was really just taking it day by day and getting through things. The one most significant part of that, I guess, would be meeting with the medical team after I'd done some rehabbing. And they went through a 3-page list of things they said I would never do again. That I would never walk, I would never ride a bike, I would never live alone, I couldn't swim or bathe alone because I might have a seizure and drown, and things like that. And so they labeled me 100% disabled and severely handicapped. And I think, honestly, those words and that label was more devastating than the injuries themselves.
But it sounds like you were very stubborn and you defied what they told you wouldn't be able to do.
I've been stubborn my whole life. And apparently back when I was in either kindergarten or first grade, the teacher at, parent-teacher conferences told my mom that I'm super stubborn, probably one of the most stubborn kids they've ever worked with, but that someday it would pay off. And it really has.
It sure has. Yeah. Wow. So you're involved in a lot of things and I want to touch on all of them. I'm curious though, when did you learn about the Americans with Disabilities Act and kind of how did that come into kind of your purview after your injury?
I actually don't think I knew about the ADA until I got assigned my first service dog. And then learning all of the access laws and things pertinent to service dogs was my first exposure with it. And then from there, learning so much more about just general accessibility, being a wheelchair user and things like that was kind of a life changer.
So after your injury, did you get involved with adaptive sports first and then service animals, or did you get involved with service animals and then adaptive sports?
Service animals first. Back when
Mhm.
I was still on active duty rehabbing, they suggested that I apply because the wait time on a service dog is so long.
Yeah.
It's usually about 2 years, but it can be longer in cases. And back when I got hurt, so I want to say it was like '07 that they started really talking about the service dog, maybe the end of 2007. And so service dog foundations and service dogs in America weren't that prevalent yet, not nearly as much as they are now. So there was really a lot to learn that way. Not a lot of people in my area with service dogs. And so going to the VA through physical therapy and everything like that, I met another veteran and his service dog. And he's kind of the one that dragged me kicking and screaming into adaptive sports.
Well, you've really excelled. It sounds like you're a, Paralympic athlete. So I'd love to hear more about that. And specifically, what are some of your proudest athletic accomplishments?
In the beginning, talking with Neil and having him kind of keep bugging me to do things, it was more like the doctor said I would never do this. Why do I want to go watch somebody else that can? So I didn't really understand what adaptive sports were. I just thought it was a bunch of people that were able to do things that I no longer could. And I was kind of upset about that. And finally I said, dude, if I come with you, will you stop bothering me? So I went to this event, and it was actually a Fun in the Sunday through the VA. And they did kayaking and water skiing. And I was actually able to water ski. And I was like, well, holy crap, if I can do this, what else can I do? And so then from Neil's prodding there, I really got into trying everything. I've tried almost every single adaptive sport there is. I declined to do quad rugby or bobsled. They had recruited me for bobsled, but with my TBI, I was too afraid that I wouldn't memorize the turns and I'd wreck and get an even better TBI. So,
oh man, yeah.
But yeah, so I started adaptive sports, and one year at the winter sports clinic, we ski and snowboard all day, and they introduced new sports at night. And so they do wheelchair basketball, and they teach you how to flip a kayak in the hotel pool. And then the one night was sled hockey. So I really, really loved it. I only made it through about 20 minutes of the session, and I kept falling over onto my elbows constantly. But I still loved it. And the group that put the demo on loaned me equipment, and I trained on my own with help of some local high school athletes. So they had to teach me what the rules were and everything about hockey. And then I tried out for the women's national team and made it my first shot 6 months after learning the sport. That was pretty incredible. I mean, just making your first national team is a really major moment in, I think, anyone's life.
Yeah.
And
absolutely.
I've now been on the team for 12 years. So I was assistant captain for a few years. I took a little step away last year to focus on track and field. And I was an alternate for the Tokyo Games in shot put and discus. So I'm currently 5th in the world in shot put and 11th in the world in discus.
Wow.
And then in 2020, while I was at the Olympic Training Center, if you meet me, you'll know I'm very high energy and I get bored very easily. So the counselors at the OTC said I needed to find a hobby while I was there, something else to do. And so I started surfing with a group and kind of walked on to the U.S. para surfing team and ended up representing the U.S. in our world championships for para surfing. So I took 5th in the world in surfing as well.
That's amazing. Do you ever just want to go back to those doctors and say, ha, look at me now?
Definitely. I get that they have to make it realistic, but it's just such a big blow to so many people when they say you'll never do something again. I worked with a local athlete here that had bone cancer, a child, and bone cancer in his leg. And they said, you'll never be normal again. You'll never be an athlete again. And he was a hockey player. How do you say that to a kid? How do you say you'll never be normal? What is normal anyway? But,
right.
To a 10, 12-year-old kid, that's huge.
And if you're an athlete, I mean, that's like a huge identity, almost like an identity crisis to now be told you can't be an athlete anymore.
Yeah, it's your favorite thing in the world, and it's a thing you're known for, and now you can't do it. So, we went back, we proved the doctor wrong. He played sled hockey with my veterans club and then ended up getting rotation plasty and was able to skate stand up again.
Wow.
So I think there's so many opportunities when the doctors try to give you the worst picture possible, but really it'd be nice if they would kind of just say, here's some other options and things you might try doing. Even when I started working at the VA, they didn't even know what rec therapy was. My rec therapist did, but I was in the hospital one day and had a doctor's appointment and I had my ID badge on me and the doctor said, oh, you work here now. What do you do? I said, I was a rec therapist. And he said, oh, what's that? I'm like, oh my God, you're the one that's supposed to be referring patients to us.
Oh my gosh.
So
Yeah.
I think if we spread more knowledge on adaptive sports in general, that would be amazing.
Yeah, well, and it sounds like, just one of the nonprofits that you are involved in, Central Maine Adaptive Sports, is kind of in support of that goal. Can you talk a little bit more about the work you do with that?
Oh, absolutely. So I found out about Central Maine Adaptive Sports several years ago. And then at the time, they were a ski and snowboard club only. And I approached their board and I said, well, you're Central Maine Adaptive Sports. Can we add more sports to that? Because I was already doing track and field at the time, and I found out that there was one single athlete from the state of Maine that went to the Adaptive Junior Nationals. And I said, how do we have only one kid in the entire state doing track and field? So it turns out it was because there weren't any programs. So that was the first sport we added, a summer option for our athletes. So we added an adaptive track and field, and we teach Special Olympians as well as para athletes in all of the different disciplines of track and field, except high jump. We don't have any mats yet. Expensive part of the sport. But to get all these kids out and do this, in our very first season, we had 14 kids participate. So after that, we saw the popularity of the summer sports, and the families were thrilled that their kids had something year-round to do. And so we added it to other sports that I love, and we added kayaking and cycling last year. So Central Maine Adaptive Sports now has ski, snowboard, snowshoe, and sled hockey in the winter, and adaptive cycling, kayaking, and track and field in the summer.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah, really just trying to bring more opportunities for the people of the state of Maine to participate.
Yeah, well, it sounds like you're doing a great job. I'd like to talk a little bit more about your work with service dogs and kind of how that's impacted your life. I would like to know a little bit more about the story behind how you got your service dog. I mean, it sounds like you went through an organization rather than self-training. So maybe you can kind of just walk us through how that all came about.
Sure. When the doctor suggested that a service dog may be of benefit to me, I looked into it, and I did end up applying to several programs. But my Moxie is actually from Canines for Warriors in Florida, and she was trained primarily to be mobility assistance and seizure alert response for me. So if I do have a seizure, she's trained to what to do and how to get help and things like that. Although that organization primarily does PTSD support dogs. Moxie was a massive benefit to my health and peace of mind, really, to the whole family, that she would help take care of me and she would get help if needed. And, she could balance me. She could fetch my wheelchair. She could do light switches, doors, access buttons. There's so many skills that they're able to teach these dogs to be able to be an asset for the rest of our life. And then I started volunteering at a local Labrador breeder because I love dogs. I've loved animals since I was a kid. My first job was volunteering at the animal shelter. But so I worked for this breeder, and schools would reach out, or training programs for service dogs would reach out about needing puppies. And did we have puppies that we could place with their program? So they taught me how to do the temperament testing and selecting puppies from litters that would go into training. And then they taught me how to be a puppy raiser. So just really the basics and what's expected of the dogs. So I did that for a number of years, and then started training on my own. And I trained 10 puppies before I founded Mission Working Dogs. So Mission Working Dogs trains PTSD service dogs and mobility assistance dogs, as well as therapy dogs for the community. So the service dogs are individually trained to mitigate a person's disability, and they're specifically tailored to that individual. And then the therapy dogs work with community groups. So we've trained some for mental health centers, nursing homes, schools, and things like that.
Yeah, that's great. Part of what we do when we take calls from people who need to understand their ADA rights, a lot of times we just hear these horror stories about experiences that people have with their service dogs in public, and having to kind of educate the public about service animals. What have been some of the challenges that you've experienced with having service dogs or training service dogs?
Most of the time it's great. I stand out in the community and pretty much everyone knows me now. So that's been a bonus. But I really have to be outgoing and constantly what we call customer service cordial. So even if I'm grocery shopping and in a rush, I still try my best to educate people on what the dogs do and why you shouldn't distract them or why they don't belong in the car to the grocery store, things like that. So most of the time I have really good experiences, and we work with a lot of businesses in the community here on the rules with service dogs, as well as holding our training and public access sessions in their stores. And then on the flip side of that, back when I was still going to school to become a rec therapist, it was like the start of the school year, September, August, when it was super hot out. We were having a heat wave here in Maine. And I walked into a convenience store to get a bottle of water, literally to buy me and the dog a bottle of water. Now, she's a golden retriever. She was vested. She had on her leash and gentle leader. She was in a perfect heel on my left side. And it was simply a convenience store in a dirty part of downtown just to buy water. And the owner of the store actually physically shoved us out of the store, despite me trying to explain that it was a service dog and that her access to the store was protected under the ADA and things like that.
Yeah.
And he profanity laden screaming about how he didn't care, basically. So I said I could have the police explain the law to him, and he said, go ahead. So I called them. Uh-huh. And at first they weren't going to do anything about it. And then when I explained what happened, they were like, oh yeah. So the officer came and took my side of the story. And while he was talking with me, the gentleman came out of the convenience store and paraded up and down the sidewalk, having a temper tantrum like a 2-year-old, screaming profanities at the police officer. So it was absolutely ridiculous. And the police sent the report to the newspaper and gave me the card to call the district attorney's office. So we actually did end up taking that guy to court, mainly because his store was directly where the public bus stops. And there were 2 other service dogs on the bus route, including a guide dog.
Yeah.
So I can't even imagine a person with a guide dog being physically shoved out of a store when they can't even see it coming. He ended up only getting fined like $8,000, I think, by the city. And they let me pick out a sign on the internet that said service dogs were welcome, that he had to mandatory keep it in the front window of the store for as long as he owned the establishment.
Wow.
I had wanted him to get community service, but they said they didn't want him in the community.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Well, I mean, it does, to me, it sounds a little bit like a success. You know, he got fined and had to hopefully change his policy around that and the sign in the window.
Yeah. And by being in the newspaper, it helped educate more of the community too about the laws and the access rights of service dogs.
Yeah.
Although I'm still constantly educating stores about when they're allowed to kick dogs out, because there are certainly cases when even an accredited service dog should be kicked out.
Yeah, it's interesting. Service dogs is one of the topics that we find really divides people. You know, some people are really have strong feelings about service dogs. Do you experience that too? And why do you think that might be?
I would say yes, we do experience it. I would say mostly that it's positive and people are impressed by our class because we'll get, a dozen dogs behaving perfectly through a shopping mall. And they're in awe of the skills that our dogs can perform and the things that they can do. Or when I go do public speaking engagements at schools or businesses, and they're just in awe of what a dog is actually capable of. But on the flip side, we get the people that have had a bad experience with a service dog or supposed service dog that peed or pooped or barked all the way through Walmart. Somebody called me the other day about a dog that was lunging at people in a store. And I was like, oh my God, this is why people with real service dogs have so much access problems.
Yeah, that's important for people to understand. What do you wish that you had known sooner about disability or accessibility after your injury?
I don't know. I guess it definitely tailored more to service dogs and the rules there. And then some more about handicap parking, because that is a nightmare. I mean, obviously you get plenty of people that park there that shouldn't. Plenty of people that have handicap parking permits that don't know, say they need the access space on the driver's side of the car, but the access aisle is on the other side between the 2 handicap spots. Rather than backing in so that the access aisle is on the right side of their car, they park on the access aisle so that they can have wheelchair space on the other side of their car. Meanwhile, they're blocking the access for the car next to them. I wish maybe when they gave out the permits, they gave a lesson on how you're supposed to park.
Yeah, that never even occurred to me that might be unclear for some people, or that they might just kind of do what they want in those spots.
Yeah, I mean, they literally never told me anything here. They just saw me go into the DMV in my wheelchair and gave me handicap plates. And here you go. Well, I don't know anything about it, but The other big confusing part up here, and I've seen it in a few other states because I'm a part of a couple of different forums online, is that there are disabled veteran plates. In many states, it just says disabled veteran, but you get them for any disability. The actual rating depends on the state, but say you're an arm amputee, you get a disabled veteran plate, but that does not mean you can park in the disabled parking space.
Yeah, and there's some confusion around that, right? People think that plate entitles them to the space.
Exactly. There's a ton of confusion on it. And even in the forums going back and forth this past week, there's been a lot of debate on it.
Well, I just think you're so impressive and you're doing so many great things for your community and educating people and bringing awareness to all of these topics. So I'm so grateful to, have been able to speak to you and get to know you a little better. Is there anything else that you'd like to share with our listeners before we kind of wrap up today?
No, just if you see a service dog working in public, please don't distract it. I know we've had patches on our dogs that say, please don't pet me. But I've literally had people try to offer dog biscuits to my dog while it's working through Walmart, or, put their hands behind their back and bend down right in the dog's face. And that's just as bad. So we've gone to patches that say, do not distract. So try not to talk to the dog, try not to make eye contact. I know they're cute and fluffy, but it really does cause a problem for our lives when you're up in their face.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that tip. And I think hopefully some of our listeners will, do that moving forward. So where can listeners get a hold of you, go to get in touch with you, find out more about you and the work that you do?
They can reach out to missionworkingdogs.org or look up Central Maine Adaptive Sports on the internet. Both are on the web and on Facebook. I believe that my personal contact information is on there, but if they want to message me personally, it's Christy@missionworkingdogs.org.
Great. And we'll put all those links in the show notes as well, so people can just, click on that and get a hold of you.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your time today, Christy.
No problem.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Adventures in Accessibility. Tune in next time for another dive into the unknown.
Adventures in Accessibility is hosted by Emily Schumann, and Jessica Lucania is our sound engineer. This podcast is a project of the Rocky Mountain ADA Center and is funded under a grant from the National Institute on Disability, Independent Living, and Rehabilitation Research. Grant number 90DPAD0009-01-00. This production is intended solely for entertainment and informal guidance and should not be considered legal advice. The opinions expressed by guests are not necessarily held or endorsed by the Rocky Mountain ADA Center.